Today we're going to be making a vegan Thai coconut curry soup from start to finish. We're going to be taking a little pivot from fish sauce and using a tamari Worcestershire mixture. We're going to use all the ingredients that would be in a traditional Thai coconut noodle soup, putting a nice spin on it and making a great vegan dish. Before we get started with our chopping today, we need to soak our noodles, our mushrooms, and press our tofu. And then the last thing I want us to do before we get started, that pot that we're going to use to cook our noodles, let's fill it up, put a lid on it, and we'll put it on the back burner or off to the side and turn it on high. Let's get started with making our curry base. The curry base ingredients are the shallots. You should have 2 shallots, ginger, Thai chilies, 3 or 4 of them, and then the head of garlic. So go ahead and chop your shallots, cutting these into a finer dice. Once we're done dicing this, we're going to run our knife through this pile of shallots a few times just to make sure all the pieces are uniform. The recipe calls for 3 cloves of garlic. If you really like garlic and you want to add an extra clove, you can do that. And again, what we're looking for is uniformity. So just make sure that all of the garlic pieces are chopped about the same size. And then when I'm done, I'm just going to push this off to the side and add this to the pile of shallots. The recipe calls for about 1 inch of ginger. Let's go ahead and peel it all and chop them into a nice fine dice. And then the last ingredient for our curry base is our bird's eye chilies. One of the flavor profiles of Thai cooking, it's always sweet, it's a little bit spicy, and it's a little bit citrusy. So I would encourage you to use some chilies today. I'm gonna use 3. That's kind of a medium heat. You can choose to make it spicier or less spicy, but we'll start by cutting off the stem of the chilies, and then we're just going to cut these chilies right in half. We're not going to worry about the seeds. The seeds are so tiny. The heat is really in the inside membrane of the chili. It's not in the seeds. So by including the seeds in this dish, we're not adding any extra heat. But it's too cumbersome to try to get these little seeds out. So I'm just going to take these halves, stack them up, and then chop them. And then once we're done with those 4 ingredients, chop them all together a few times to mimic, we're kind of mimicking a paste. And the more we can chop it, the more surface area we're exposing and the more flavor we're going to get out of this. So really, this is going to be our base flavor. This is basically our curry paste. So let's grab our pot. We'll turn our heat up to kind of a medium-low heat. Go ahead and put about 2 tablespoons of oil on the bottom of my pan, just enough to coat the bottom. Once your oil is hot, put this into the pan, and they should sizzle. It should start to sing. Grab your spoon. As soon as we add these ingredients, we need to make sure that we're stirring them constantly. We don't want this to stick. Coat all of those ingredients nicely. Flatten it out on the bottom of your pan. What we're looking for here is our shallots is kind of one of the key ingredients that we'll be able to tell if we're ready. So they're going to go from a very opaque state to a very translucent state. The longer that we can cook this, the more flavor we're going to get out of it. And this is really the base. This is our curry base. Shallots are starting to become translucent. Go ahead, add all of the turmeric, which is a tablespoon, and the coriander, 1 teaspoon. Give it a nice stir, and then add about 1 teaspoon of salt. And that's going to start building some flavor in our pan. Anytime you're cooking, it's always important to build flavor as you go. You don't want to wait to the very end, especially with salt, to start seasoning your dish. We've cooked this for about 1 minute. A lot of this is sticking to the bottom, it's not burning. I'm going to go ahead and add our 5 cups of water, or 40 ounces. Pour that in. And once you do that, let's encourage anything that's been sticking to the bottom to release itself. Once we do that, we'll grab our coconut milk and we'll add that into our soup base. That's going to really give us the body to this dish. Let's turn this mixture up to high, bring it up to a full boil, then we can turn it down to a simmer. Now we're going to start with our infusion, our flavoring of this soup. We're making this vegan and we're not using a traditional meat stock. There's a few things that we need to do to bump up the flavor a little bit. So we're going to kind of take some liberties today and make a sachet. Open up this cheesecloth. We're going to open it up so that it's 2 layers thick. I'm just going to set this in front of my cutting board, and what we're going to put in here is the lemongrass, the galanga, and then the lime leaves. So what we're going to do is we're just going to slice it and expose as much surface area as we can to get as much flavor out of this lemongrass. So what I like to do is just break it off, almost like you're going to break the end of an asparagus. And we'll just pull that off and get rid of it. All we're doing is trying to get the flavor out of this lemongrass, which we're gonna put in the sachet to give our soup some nice lemongrass flavor. So I'm just gonna put the lemongrass in the center of my cheesecloth, and then we're gonna take the galanga. We're not gonna worry about peeling it. I'm just gonna make really thin half moons. The thinner we can slice it, the more flavor we're gonna get out of these ingredients. So I'm just gonna put all of that galanga in the center. The last thing we're gonna put in here are these lime leaves. So I'm just gonna crush up these 4 lime leaves, throw them on top of the lemongrass and the galanga, and then we're gonna tie up this little sachet. Grab them so you make a nice little bundle, and then we're gonna use really one side of the string. The reason we're gonna do that is we're gonna leave a nice tail with the rest of the string. We're gonna tie this to the handle of our pot. We have a lot of excess cheesecloth. Grab a pair of scissors or your knife. Let's get rid of that. My soup has just come up to a boil. I'm gonna turn it down to a simmer now, and then I'm gonna take the sachet, put it into the pot, and then tie the string around my handle. That way I can find it later. The last thing we need to put in our soup today to flavor it is the kombu. This is really the original MSG. This is where MSG comes from. So this has a lot of flavor, and we're gonna use this today to add a little umami flavor to our soup. And then we're gonna tuck this into our soup, maybe right underneath the sachet. And this is gonna give us a lot of flavor. The vegetables I've included today, we have carrots, pepper, and then also the shiitake mushrooms that we were soaking, and the tofu. Let's start with the pepper. Cut a few panels off the pepper, and then we're gonna cut those panels into little strips. Take this pepper and cut across it about 1/4 inch thick, and we'll do that with all of the pepper. And then we'll move on to the carrots. Cut the stems off of the carrots, and I'm gonna cut these carrots on a bias, or like a 45-degree angle, giving them a little bit more length. Once the peppers and the carrots are all done, throw them in, and then I'm gonna grab this tofu. I'm gonna pour the excess liquid off that's been pressed out. Now I have this thick rectangle. I'm gonna cut this in half, and then cut the long slide into 6 slices by 5 slices. So we're gonna get 30 dice per slab of tofu. Add all of the tofu into our dish. And then the last ingredient we're gonna put in here are the mushrooms. We're gonna use this liquid. And the reason we're gonna use this liquid is that once you dry mushrooms, it forms a glutamate, much like MSG. And it also has a lot of flavor. So we're gonna use this to enhance our soup. If you have a fine strainer, you can just pour this right over the soup, remove the stem, set those aside, we're not gonna use them. Break them into nice little chunks, and then we'll throw them in the soup. These will hydrate nicely right in the soup. We're gonna go ahead and we're gonna cook our noodles right now. And then we can grab the noodles. They've probably softened nicely. And so now they're a lot more pliable. You can strain this water off, or you could just pick these noodles right up out of the pot, and we can throw them into the boiling water. I'm gonna grab my tongs and give them a little bit of a stir, just to tuck them in, make sure that they're not sticking together. Once the water has come back to a full boil, we'll set our timer for 3 minutes. So let's grab our limes, cilantro, our brown sugar, our salt, and then the last thing we need is our Worcestershire. So we can start with the cilantro. Cut just a little bit of the stems off, and then chop the cilantro. We'll chop it pretty fine. We'll throw this in right at the end. If you have a citrus press or a reamer, that's great. Or we can squeeze these by hand directly over our dish. I'm gonna go ahead and check the noodles, drain these noodles, and run them under cold water, stopping the cooking and making sure they don't stick together. And you can bring that pot back to the stove. We'll just let that drain. Go ahead and add the entire container of tamari, Worcestershire in. So we'll get a nice burst of salt. And then let's grab our brown sugar. That's gonna give you that nice bit of sweetness that we come to expect in Thai cooking. So I'm gonna grab 2 limes to start. I just put it in a citrus press right over my pot, getting as much juice as I can out of it. And then we'll taste it and see if we wanna add that final lime. And then we're gonna add a teaspoon of salt. And then I'm gonna take the rest of the cilantro and put it all in there. And then we'll stir it and taste it. So this soup, as with any soups, the longer they have to kind of cook together and marry all the flavors, the better. So the rice stick noodles, they have dried all the water's come out of them. I'm gonna go ahead and add the rest of the oil on top and just mix it up a little bit. This is gonna stop the noodles from sticking together. It'll be a lot easier later on to separate it. So what you wanna do is just take a little bit of the noodles, put it in your bowl, and then we'll ladle some soup right on top. When you go to serve this, it's best to keep the noodles in the soup separate, because what's gonna happen is the noodles are gonna wanna just soak up all of the soup and they'll get mushy. So it's always a good idea to store your noodles and your soup separately. So if you have leftovers tonight, keep those in separate containers, but when you go to heat it up tomorrow, you can always add those together. But you know, if you've ever gotten pho or ramen, you'll always get the noodles packed separately, and that's because noodles love to soak up liquid.